We're going to stop global warming. That was the resolve of last year's International Climate Conference. To achieve that, CO2 emissions and fossil fuel use have to be reduced. Oil, gas and coal have been reliable sources of profit. Until now, that is. Prices have been plunging for quite some time, and investors are taking vast amounts of their money out of the sector.
Painful pictures. At the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, the world's nations agreed to end the carbon-based economy. But smokestacks are still spewing out greenhouse gases. For how much longer? 10 years? Perhaps 50? Model cities such as Rizhao in the Chinese province of Shandong demonstrate that the transition to solar and wind energy has begun. There are examples like these all around the world. Despite that, phasing out coal, oil and natural gas won't happen overnight. But hasn't the fossil fuel industry long been playing for time? Divest now. For years, a worldwide movement has been urging people to stop investing in fossil fuels.
People are just lining up to try and get involved in this
Its
fight.
initiator, Bill McKibben, gives the coal industry 15 more years at most. Otherwise, the climate expert tells large crowds at events, preventing global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels cannot be achieved.
Pleasure for me to get to be here tonight.
Is McKibben a radical?
I think we know what we need to do. I think we've peeled away the layers of the onion. We've gotten to the very heart of things. As of tonight, we're taking on the fossil fuel industry directly. The moment has come that we have to make real stands. We're reaching limits. The biggest limit that we're running into may be that we're running out of atmosphere into which to put the waste products of our society, particularly the carbon dioxide that's the ubiquitous byproduct of burning fossil fuel.
London. This is the source of the data McKibben relies on. Carbon Trackers, an NGO, has determined that the enormous sums invested in fossil fuel companies, funds and insurance policies are at risk.
The main assets are the oil, gas and coal in the ground, and the extent to which the future business of these companies is based on those assets, and particularly if they start pouring significant amounts of money into developing those. I mean, for example, we've seen a recent example that Shell poured around $8 billion into drilling in the Arctic and has now pulled out of the Arctic. So, of course, that $8 billion is now lost. You could describe that as value destruction.
A carbon bubble is said to threaten those funding Shell and other fossil fuel companies. A disastrous devaluation of their investments is looming. What Greenpeace activists have long been claiming is now considered the scientific consensus. We can only allow ourselves to use a fifth of the world's reserves. At the same time, more and more people understand that the fossil fuel industry works by using everyone's savings invested in funds and insurance policies.
These companies are a rogue force. They're outlaws. They're not outlaws against the laws of the state. They get to write those for the most part. But they're outlaw against the laws of physics. If they carry out their business plan, the planet tanks.
More than 500 institutions around the world have by now pledged to divest more than $3.4 trillion from the coal and oil sectors. They include cities such as Oslo, institutions like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and insurers such as Allianz.
It's great. It is putting pressure. But we need also to create a hard place to divestments rock. We need to map out the transition for the fossil fuel industry around which mainstream financial institutions can engage.
Are alarm bells also ringing in the financial world? The City of London, the Bank of Montreal's global asset management, is one of the world's top funds managers. The institution was worried about its portfolios before the Paris summit. Where might it find new investment opportunities outside the coal and gas industries?
It's most important for the markets to have this energy transition take place with as few surprises as possible. That was one of our demands to the G7 and G20 members. On the part of investors, we actively promoted having the 2-degree target implemented in a way that markets can adjust to.
The transition from coal and oil won't be enforced with a big bang, but gradually via limits on emissions. The Paris conference, COP21, produced a situation that big money can work with.
If we sit down with fund managers and say we can predict everything, we can calculate our carbon footprint and what it says about investment risk, that's the point where things get going. It's important that the COP21 framework gives us political guidelines, so we as investors can say, okay, we can move within these parameters. Now we can decide where to divest and where to invest.
So that's our job, to rewrite the story.
For the divestment movement, the most recent climate conference was a success. But its opponents from the coal and oil sector are also pleased with the Paris Agreement. The big money will be able to rely on its old sources of profit for quite a while yet.
By far in U.S. history.